databases and your tables and how everything relates to everything else, and they go, ha ha ha, yeah, wouldn't you like that? Ha ha, read your contract. Contract says, no, no, we do not tell you that, and no, no, you cannot try to reverse engineer that by looking at the code to figure out how we store the data, because we got a clause in there that says no decompilation or reverse engineering of the internal operation of the application, or we sue you. Right? I mean, that could be the way the contract reads, because, see, from the point of view of the vendor, they may say, hey, man, that data structure, that is our valuable intellectual property. Somebody who knows how we store the data is learning how our application works, and that's part of our secret sauce. That's part of our magic, right? That's something we had to figure out. So no, we don't want to tell you that. We're not going to tell you that. We don't have to tell you that. Now what are you going to do? Right? You can't very well anonymize the data if you don't know how it's set up. Yeah? If you go in there and just like go, oh, well, those look like names. I guess I'll change those. Who knows what's going to happen? So, you know, you might say, well, that shouldn't happen because all this stuff should be addressed during the selection process. So when they went through and did the vendor selection, one of the things that should have been specified in there is that, you know, we've got some sort of way of getting at anonymized test data. Yep, that definitely should be the case. That should be the case. And if only things that should happen in this world happened in this world, we would not need policemen or armies. Because there should be no crimes and there should be no wars, right? Because those are all very regrettable things, but they happen, right? And another regrettable thing that happens is we as testers don't get involved in the vendor selection. Okay? And so you often are just having to deal with whatever's out there. So be ready for that. Be ready for, there's like going to be pools of data out there where, you know, it's like they're dark, they're opaque basically. You can't get information as to how they're structured. Now this may not happen to you. You might not have this problem. You might be lucky. It might be all like, hey, it's all SQL databases or it's other kinds of data. Even if it's NoSQL, it's still stuff that I've got metadata that describes it and I know how it works. Okay, cool, but that's not everybody's reality. Okay, so a lot of this discussion has been around problems with data, and a lot of it comes back to tools. Now, I don't want to belabor this point of tool selection just because this is something that's kind of tangential to this topic. And it is also something I've covered elsewhere, so if you were to want to get some more insights on this, if you go to the RBCS YouTube channel, and I'll put the coordinates up for that here at the end. If you go to the RBCS YouTube channel, there is a recorded webinar out there. It's about an hour long and talks about tool selection, best practices for tool selection. This slide is a summary here of success with test data tools, basically summarizes that presentation. Because basically success with the data tool, test data tool selection is like any other test tool or any other tool in general. Talk to the right people, have documented requirements, know the risks, know what could go wrong, know limits on your budget and when things have to be in place. Only at that point should you start looking at tool options. The prime mistake that people make, including testers with tools, is they go, hey, I need a tool. I think I'll go search the internet and see what's out there. And now you have anchored yourself. By anchored, I mean it's a psychological thing called anchoring, where basically your frame of reference about what you're trying to do has now been defined by the tool vendors, which is very nice for them, but very sad for you. Because what you need to do is think about what problem you're actually trying to solve first, and then go out and figure out, will this tool help me solve it? So once you've done the requirements, the constraints, the risks, that's the point where you start looking at the tools, evaluate them, come to a short list, do selection, but tentative selection, do a pilot first, and then once you've gone through the pilot, then roll it out. If you try to shortcut this process, you are taking a dangerous risk. I see this happen all the time with clients. They get in a hurry and they're like, I just got to go out and get a tool. Any tool, you know, there's many of them. Yeah, and they're probably, most of them are wrong for you. And I see this over and over again. I go in and work with clients and they start telling me some really sad story that involves tools, and a central element of that sad story is we didn't do this part right. We didn't select the tool right. So spare yourself. Okay, so hopefully this presentation has made you aware of some of the testing challenges associated with enterprise applications that relate to test data. Obviously there are a bunch of a wider set of challenges that relate to enterprise scale applications that go beyond data, but this is certainly one of the key areas. So there's issues like, where do we get the data? How do we preserve privacy? Do we have tools? How big is the data? How much money do we have? Does this actually test what we think it's going to test? Okay. So I haven't given you a single solution to all these challenges because no such thing exists. But what I hope I've done is given you a broader awareness of these challenges so that you're ready to go off and start putting together a plan that help you deal with these challenges, assuming that these are things that you come up against. Again, you might not come up against these today or tomorrow, but at some point in your career as a tester, you're likely to be running into these things. And you know, I've seen these be major obstacles for a lot of clients, major hurdles that they have to overcome. So, you know, being prepared to deal with them is really important. Don't just, you know, hey, I'll figure it out when I get there, because that's not a good strategy either. Okay, so here's contact information, and there's the YouTube channel is down there. If you want to go, there's about 600-700 videos out on the YouTube channel, including a bunch of recorded webinars, so subscribe to that and keep up to date. And there's, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, there's the LinkedIn info. So any questions? No? Perfectly clear or totally confusing? Good. Well, thank you very much for your time and attention. I will take a short break here before the next session, which will be the one on test-driven development. So if you want to come back for that, I'll be starting in 5 minutes. All right, thank you. Based in Texas, and this is my, I don't know, 10th, 15th, 20th trip or something like that to Malaysia. I think on average I've been here a couple times a year since 2008. So quite familiar with the food and the weather and all the wonderfulness that is around here. But someday I have to go out and do a little more tourism. I was listening to John's talk last night, going, he's rattling off all these places he's been to. I'm like, gosh, I haven't been there. So to come back and spend some more time when I have free time. Okay, so this session is about something called TDD, Test-Driven Development. And so how many of you have heard that? TDD, stick your hand up, TDD, Test-Driven Development, just a few of you. Okay, so this is quite a big deal, test-driven development, in certain parts of the United States, Europe, and Canada, some countries where Agile is very prevalent. It has a certain amount of controversy associated with it for reasons that I'll explain. And it's certainly got a fair number of misunderstandings associated with it as well. Like what is TDD like really? And of course, as a tester, you know, the question is, do I care? And the answer is, yeah, you should. This is something you should know about, even if it's primarily the responsibility of developers. Because, you know, as testers, when the developers don't do their job right, that's your problem. Yeah? So the developer's supposed to be doing TDD, and they're not. That's going to flow downstream to you. Now you might think, oh, test-driven development. Well, so TDD must be kind of like the same as acceptance test-driven development, or ATDD, or behavior-driven development, or BDD. I mean, after all, look at all the letters in common. No, it's not. They're different. And I'm going to quickly explain ATDD and BDD so that you're clear on those and how they're different than TDD, because this is a real problem with just IT in general, software engineering, is we get this sort of buzzword tornado, right? And there's all these buzzwords and they're swirling around and they sound kind of the same and we think we know what they mean, but no. Okay? So, now you might say, oh, well this, I know what this is, test-driven development. This is where the testers drive the developers. Testers tell the developers what to do. No. It is definitely not that. Test-driven development is something that was created by developers, and trust me, the one thing a developer will never ever ask for is for a tester to tell him or her what to do. So that doesn't work that way. So that's not what it is. And in fact, test-driven development might not really even be testing. At least not the way that you as a professional tester are used to thinking about testing. Now, can it be testing? Maybe. I'll talk about that in a minute. What could make this into testing? Now you might go, oh, well, this doesn't apply to me because we're not doing Agile, so it's not relevant because it's all Agile. Well, no. It grew out of an Agile set of practices called extreme programming, but that doesn't mean that it's only applicable in that setting. Okay? So it's like Scrum grew out of software development, but there are people running around talking about, well, you could use Scrum to build just about anything. So, you know, TDD could spread, and probably will spread into other things like Lean and DevOps and who knows what. So, what is this thing that everybody talks about and not everybody understands? So, test-driven development. It is a development technique primarily. Sometimes referred to as test-first development. Because it's primarily a development technique, not primarily a testing technique. And the idea is that the tests lead the coding. Now this concept actually goes way back to, believe it or not, Dave Gelperin, who was on the original IEEE 829 Standards Committee, and out of that, this is 1983-ish, out of that he came up with this thing that he called systematic software testing, and one of its central principles was that test design should drive code design. So like a lot of things in Agile, this is one of these ideas that's been around a long time, and boom, it just pops back up like a mushroom or something. There it is again. So the idea is that I'm going to write a test for a really small piece of code. You might say, how small? I'll explain. You write the test. It's an automated test. You run the test. Now the test should fail because you haven't written the code yet. And then you start writing the code. And you write code until that test passes, and then you stop. And you go back to writing more tests. You might also, before you go back to writing more tests, do something called refactoring, which is basically make your design a little more elegant before you go back to writing the additional test. But you're not allowed to write any new code unless you have failing tests. That's what the grand poobah of test-driven development, Kent Beck says. Martin Fowler, those guys, no new code unless you got a failing test. And I'll explain this in a bit about even more detail. Like this is pretty fine-grained stuff. as I say, came out of Agile extreme programming in particular, but you know, it can also be used in sequential life cycles and prototyping life cycles. Bugs are fixed on the spot. So unlike a lot of situations where you're running automated tests, you're like, oh, we found a bug. Let's report the bug. Let's get it fixed. No, the developer fixes the bug when the developer sees it. Because is it really a bug? If the code is not yet done being written, is it actually a bug? A lot of people would say no, it's just, you know, if you bite into a half-cooked piece of bread, don't be surprised that it's not bread, it's dough, right? Same kind of thing here, it's not done yet. So, in a sense, TDD is more like executable design specifications than like tests. And it results in growing a set of automated design specs that end up being part of your continuous integration framework, like Jenkins, Hudson, those sort of things. You guys say, okay, well, that sounds kind of sort of like acceptance test driven development. Well, at least the name's similar. Well, yeah, but it's different, because if you're familiar with Agile and you've ever seen acceptance test driven development, what's happening here is, based on the user story, we're defining acceptance criteria. And we're using that definition of acceptance criteria in a collaborative way with the stakeholders to make sure that we all understand, hey, this is how this thing is supposed to work. Now, if you ever look at tests that were created with TDD, these automated tests, if you're a programmer, you'll be able to read them and go, yeah, I know what that says. But you could not put those in front of the average business analyst, and the business analyst goes, oh, yes, I understand the business behavior that's being specified here. Right, so it's at a different level. It's not so much about behavior per se, though it's about behavior of individual units. Now, similar to TDD, the ATDD can result in automated tests that are ultimately part of the continuous integration framework. But it's system level tests, it's acceptance level tests, it's not unit level tests. So the granularity of the thing being tested is different. And then we have BDD, so here's more of the alphabet soup here, behavior-driven development. Okay, so this is also about thinking about behavior, about what's supposed to happen, similar to ATDD. So you get these automated tests that are expressed using the syntax that, I'm not making this up, it's called a gherkin. Given that something is true, when something happens, then this should happen. Given that the customer has provided valid credit card information, when the customer clicks submit order, a transaction should be sent to the web service that processes the transactions. Something like that. Okay? So it's a behavioral description. Whereas the TDD tests are down inside the how the system is built. So they're different. So, process of TDD here, if it's your first time, you're going to set up what's called a unit test framework, so something like CPP unit, JUnit, something like that, commonly used tools for this. And I'm going to design the module by breaking down this thing to be built into a tentative set of chunks that I want to build it in. And for each one of these little chunks, I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to create a test, run it, as I said, make sure it fails. Now I write only the code that's needed to make that new test pass. Not allowed to write more code than that. Refactoring, as I said, you can refactor the code if you're like, you write it and the test passes and you're looking at the code and you're like, nah, I don't like that. You hear people in Agile sometimes talk about code smells, which is kind of a funny choice of word, because a smell, I mean, to me, a smell can be good or a smell can be bad. And smells are a matter of taste, right? So believe this or not, like, just a couple nights ago, I went out to the durian stand. Now this time I'm going to one-up John, because John was like bragging about all the different places he's seen in Malaysia. Yeah, he may have seen a lot of places, but I eat the durian. I sat down and I ate an entire durian pretty much by myself. Okay, now I think it smells fine, because, you know, I start getting that smell coming towards my nose. I'm like, yeah, I know what that's going to taste like. That's going to be great, you know. And most people are like, well, most Westerners would just go, whoa. No, I'm not putting that in my mouth. All right, so anyway, smell is a funny word because smell is subjective. But when Agile developers talk about code smells, what they're talking about are bad smells. Okay, and so you'll hear people talking about, well, there's some bad smell, so I need to refactor my code. That basically means I just didn't like the design of the code, so I'm going to refactor it. So you're allowed to do that, but you're not allowed to write new code unless you have failing tests. So each time you get to the end of one of these test code refactor cycles, you go back and write some more tests. One way to think of this is, you know, you grow like a vine. Phil will be able to relate to this, right? Because you do this with like tomato bushes, right? You have some sort of trellis or form that you grow the vine up around, right? That's kind of what happens with these TDD tests, is that the tests form a kind of a trellis that the code is grown on. The tests are out ahead saying this is what the code is supposed to do. And at the end of this process, once the code is complete, now I have that trellis that I've built that basically says this is what this code is supposed to work like. And that all goes into the continuous integration framework. Like I said, Hudson, Jenkins, whatever you're using. And those tests can be run every single time a new build comes along, making sure that the thing continues to work the same way that it used to work when I first built it. Okay? At least the tests that passed when I first built it continue to pass. More on this, what level of confidence can we have, in a minute. Okay, so that's TDD. Like, you know, I have a feeling that if Beck or Fowler, or one of those sort of apostles of TDD were in the room, so far I probably haven't said anything that they'd object to too much. So I don't know, they might. But so far I'm pretty much along the lines of TDD orthodoxy here. Now, so here's some stuff that people say sometimes. They say they're doing TDD. What they actually mean by that. So we have clients that will say, oh yeah, we're doing TDD. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, what does that look like? Oh, we got automated unit tests.